The grand strategy. Supreme Commander Xerox stood before the massive holographic display in the Strategic Command Center of Nexus Prime, her iridescent scales gleaming under the soft purple light. The display showed a detailed three-dimensional map of Earth's solar system, with thousands of data points highlighting what the Nexian Intelligence Corps had gathered over the past decade of covered observation. "Fellow members of the High Command," she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Today marks the beginning of our greatest conquest." Her four-fingered hand swept through the hologram, expanding the image of Earth. This unremarkable planet, inhabited by a species that has barely mastered basic spaceflight, holds the resources we need to fuel our empire's expansion for the next millennium. The assembled admirals and generals, each representing a different branch of the Nexian military machine, watched in respectful silence. Their species had conquered 12 star systems in the past century alone, each victory more decisive than the last. Their technological superiority, combined with their perfectly organized military doctrine, had never failed them. Xerox manipulated the hologram again, highlighting the planned approach vectors for their fleet. "Our analysis indicates that humans still rely on primitive radio-based communication systems and chemical propulsion for their spacecraft. Their military forces are fragmented, divided by what they call nations. Their weapons are crude, primarily kinetic and chemical-based. They have no unified planetary defense system." Admiral Kextor, her most trusted subordinate, stepped forward. "Supreme Commander, our simulations show a 99.8% chance of complete victory within their first solar day of combat. The humans' most powerful weapons would barely scratch our lowest-grade shields." Xerox nodded, pleased. Their planning had been meticulous, as always. The Nexian way was built on perfect information, perfect execution, and perfect results. They had spent years studying Earth's entertainment broadcasts, their military communications, their scientific publications. Every detail had been cataloged, analyzed, and accounted for in their strategy. "Our first wave will consist of 300 ships," she continued, highlighting the massive vessels of the hologram. "We'll emerge simultaneously from quantum space at these 12 strategic points, effectively surrounding their planet. Their primitive detection systems won't register our presence until we're already in position." The hologram shifted to show the predicted human response patterns, based on their behavioral analysis. "They will likely attempt to negotiate first. Their entertainment broadcasts show a consistent pattern of seeking diplomatic solutions. When that fails, they will launch their nuclear weapons." A slight smile crossed her scaled features. "Our quantum fields will simply absorb that energy, adding it to our own power reserves." The assembled commanders nodded in appreciation of the elegant strategy. It was textbook Nexian doctrine, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision, leaving the enemy no chance to mount an effective defense. "The second phase begins precisely 3 hours after emergence," Xerox continued, bringing up detailed tactical displays. "Our ground forces will deploy to these strategic locations, securing their major military installations and governmental centers. Based on their documented behavior in regional conflicts, we expect their resistance to crumble once their command structure is decapitated." She paused, surveying the room. "Are there any questions about the plan?" General Vexmar of the ground forces raised his hand. "Supreme Commander, what of their distributed communication networks? The ones they call Internet?" "Already accounted for," Xerox replied smoothly. "Our cyber warfare units have spent years mapping their digital infrastructure. When we strike, their networks will be severed within minutes. They will be blind, deaf, and unable to coordinate any meaningful resistance." The meeting continued for another hour as Xerox detailed every aspect of the invasion plan. Each contingency had been analyzed, each possible human response calculated and countered before it could even begin. The Nexian military machine was perfection itself, a testament to their species' dedication to order and control. As the commanders filed out to begin final preparations, Admiral Kextor remained behind. "Supreme Commander, this will be your greatest triumph. The Council will surely promote you to Grand Strategist after such a victory." Xerox turned to face the massive viewport, watching as the invasion fleet assembled in high orbit around Nexus Prime. 300 ships, each a masterpiece of engineering, their quantum drives capable of crossing galaxies, their weapons able to reshape planets. "This isn't about personal glory, Kextor," she replied. "This is about maintaining the perfect order of our expansion. Humans are chaotic, unpredictable in their individual actions. But like all lesser species, They follow predictable patterns when viewed properly. Our victory will be absolute because it must be. Anything less would suggest a flaw in our doctrine. Little did Supreme Commander Xerox know that her perfect plan was about to collide with humanity's greatest weapon, their ability to be perfectly unpredictable. First contact gone wrong. The quantum space ruptures shimmered like dark mirrors across Earth's orbit, exactly as planned. Supreme Commander Xerox watched with satisfaction as her fleet emerged at precisely calculated coordinates, their formation perfect down to the millimeter. Everything was proceeding according to doctrine. Then her tactical officer screamed. The sound was so unprecedented, so against all military protocol, that for a moment Xerox thought she had imagined it. Nexian officers didn't scream. They didn't show emotion. They executed their duties with precision and multiple targets. The officers shouted, their scales shifting to a pale yellow of extreme stress. Thousands? No, tens of thousands of objects approaching at relativistic speeds. Xerox rushed to the tactical display, her perfect posture forgotten. The space around her fleet was filled with countless small objects, each no bigger than a ground transport, all moving at speeds that should have been impossible for human technology. Evasive action, she ordered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was too late. The objects were already among them, their trajectories seemingly random yet somehow managing to avoid all attempts at targeting. Admiral Kexter's voice crackled over the command channel. Supreme Commander, these are not weapons. They're probes. They're scanning us, mapping our shield frequencies, analyzing our... His transmission cut off as the first wave of actual human weapons arrived. They weren't the primitive nuclear missiles the Nexians had expected. Instead, beams of coherent light, precisely tuned to the frequencies the probes had discovered, sliced through their quantum shields like they weren't even there. Impossible, Xerox whispered. Their technological level, all our intelligence. Commander, her science officer interrupted. We're detecting artificial quantum entanglement signatures. The humans aren't using standard communications. They're using quantum-linked networks. Our cyber warfare attacks are useless. The perfect formation began to break apart as ship after ship reported shield failures. The humans hadn't just developed countermeasures. They had apparently been waiting, ready, with exactly the right technology to neutralize every Nexian advantage. Fall back to secondary positions, Xerox ordered, fighting to keep her voice steady. Implement contingency protocol. A new voice cut across all their communication channels, speaking perfect Nexian. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. I must admit, your arrival coordinates were exactly where we predicted. Your species does love its precision. Xerox felt her scales ripple with shock. They had been studying humans, yes, but the humans had been studying them right back. And they had done it without being detected, without giving away their true capabilities. Perhaps, Admiral Chen continued, we should discuss the terms of your surrender. We've taken the liberty of analyzing your command protocols, and I believe Section 47B allows for honorable withdrawal in the face of superior technological force. The tactical display showed more human ships emerging from hiding positions throughout the solar system. They had been there all along, concealed by technology the Nexians hadn't even known was possible. Each vessel was different. There was no standardization, no perfect formation, no predictable pattern to their deployment. How? Xerox demanded, her composure finally cracking. How did you hide all of this? Oh, that's simple, Chen replied, and Xerox could hear the smile in her voice. We showed you exactly what you expected to see. Your doctrine says that inferior species will display their highest achievements openly, trying to impress potential threats. So we made sure our public technology was exactly what you expected. Everything else, well, we've learned that sometimes the best place to hide something is in plain sight. On Xerox's flagship, the perfect Nexian battle fleet was in chaos. Their weapons were useless against the humans' adaptive shielding. Their quantum communication networks were being systematically dismantled by human cyber warfare that somehow operated on principles they couldn't even detect, let alone counter. And worst of all, there was no pattern to it. The humans weren't following any predictable military doctrine. Each of their ships seemed to be fighting independently, adapting its tactics on the fly, coordinating with others in ways that defied tactical analysis. This is impossible, her tactical officer muttered, staring at the display. Their ships, they're all different designs, different weapons, different shields. There's no standardization, no unity of approach. How can they even function as a military force? Xerox watched as another wave of human vessels emerged, these carrying what appeared to be boarding parties. The perfect plan hadn't just failed, it had never had a chance of succeeding, because they had made the most fundamental mistake possible. They had assumed that humanity's apparent chaos was a weakness. Instead, it had proven to be their greatest strength. "Admiral Chen," she said finally, her voice heavy with the weight of unprecedented defeat, "perhaps we should discuss those terms." "Wonderful," Chen replied cheerfully. "And while we're at it, maybe we can talk about why you thought broadcasting all your military codes through public entertainment channels was a good idea. Those space opera shows you intercepted? We knew you were watching." For the first time in her long military career, Supreme Commander Zorax had no response. The perfect plan, it seemed, had been perfected by the wrong side. The counterstrike. The detention chamber aboard the Earth Defense Force flagship Unexpected Solution was comfortable, if disconcertingly irregular in its design. Supreme Commander Zorax sat rigidly in a chair that seemed deliberately designed to not quite match her Nexian physiology, watching a holoscreen that showed her once perfect fleet being systematically contained by human forces. "Your ship's quantum cores are being safely deactivated," Admiral Chen explained, entering the chamber with a casual stride that made Zorax's scales itch. How could a military commander carry themselves with such informality? "We found it's better to do each one slightly differently. Prevents any unfortunate cascade reactions. You're violating every principle of proper military procedure," Zorax responded stiffly. "Standardization ensures safety, and standardization ensures predictability," Chen interrupted, dropping into a chair that spun slightly. "And predictability gets you killed. Watch this." The Vola screen shifted to show a Nexian cruiser attempting to execute their standard emergency quantum jump procedure. As the quantum field began to form, 3 human vessels of completely different designs approached it from seemingly random vectors. Each fired a different type of interference beam, and the quantum field collapsed harmlessly. "Your entire civilization is built on the idea that there's one perfect way to do everything," Chen continued. "One perfect strategy, one perfect response, one perfect counter to every situation. And that works brilliantly against enemies who think the same way. But humans," she grinned, "we specialize in being gloriously, catastrophically unpredictable." As if to emphasize her point, the holoscreen showed a human vessel literally surfing the quantum wake of a retreating Nexian ship, using the energy discharge to boost itself into an impossible attack position. The maneuver violated at least 7 laws of physics as Zorax understood them. "That's not possible," she muttered. "Funny thing about not possible," Chen replied. "Humans tend to treat it as more of a suggestion than a rule. Did you know that Pilot actually invented that maneuver on the spot? Saw an opportunity and just went for it. Now we're probably going to have to name it after her, once we figure out how she did it." Zorax's scales shifted in distress. How can you operate an effective military if your forces just improvise? "That's the neat part. We don't operate an effective military, at least not by your standards. We operate an adaptive military. Every ship captain has broad strategic objectives, but nearly complete tactical freedom. Every vessel is different because they're all constantly being modified based on individual crew experiences and ideas. That squadron over there?" She pointed to a group of ships that looked like they had been assembled from entirely different design philosophies. They'd all started as the same base model 6 months ago. Now each crew has optimized their ship for their preferred fighting style. The Vola screen shifted again, showing the aftermath of the initial battle. Next-gen ships were being corralled by human vessels using such a wild variety of techniques that Zorax could barely follow what she was seeing. Some were using gravitational nets, others quantum field disruptors, and one appeared to be hurting ships by projecting holographic images of something the Supreme Commander's mind refused to properly process. "Here's the thing about humans," Chen said, leaning forward. "We're really good at looking incompetent when we want to. Those divided militaries. They're still divided. But it turns out that having multiple different approaches to solving problems is an advantage when you're facing an enemy that expects everyone to follow the same rulebook. Those primitive technologies we showed off. Perfect cover for developing the weird stuff. And fusion power," she laughed. "We cracked that ages ago. But someone suggested that if we publicly struggled with it, any watching aliens would underestimate us. It was actually a joke in a science fiction novel, but we figured it was worth trying." The Vola screen now showed human ships beginning to escort the captured Nexian vessels toward Earth. Each human ship was using a different method to maintain control, making it impossible for the Nexians to develop a single countermeasure. "I have a proposition for you, Supreme Commander," Chen said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Your fleet is defeated, but we both know there are more Nexian forces out there. You could call them in, and we'd have a much bigger fight on our hands. We'd win. We've got plenty more surprises ready, but it would be messy. Or, Xerox prompted when Chen paused dramatically. Or you could help us teach your people something they desperately need to learn. The perfect plan isn't always the right plan. Sometimes chaos is the best strategy of all." As if to punctuate her point, one of the human ships on the screen suddenly sprouted what appeared to be giant mechanical tentacles, using them to gently but firmly guide a Nexian vessel into formation. "That's not regulation equipment," Xerox noted weakly. "Nope," Chen agreed cheerfully. "The crew watched some old Earth entertainment called Enam and got inspired. Works pretty well, though, doesn't it? So, what do you say? Ready to learn how to think outside your very geometrically perfect box?" For the first time in her life, Supreme Commander Xerox considered the possibility that perfection might be overrated. Lessons in chaos. Supreme Commander Xerox stood in the Earth Defense Force's main strategic command center, her perfect posture slightly marred by the fact that she kept tilting her head in confusion. The room itself seemed designed to challenge every Nexian principle of military organization. Instead of ordered rows of identical workstations, the human operators were arranged in what appeared to be completely random clusters. Some were standing, others lounging in chairs that looked more suited to relaxation than warfare, and one was actually suspended upside down in what they called a zero gaming setup. "You're telling me," Xerox said slowly, "that your most effective cyber warfare specialist insists on working upside down?" "Says it helps her think outside the box," Admiral Chen replied with a shrug. "Hard to argue with results. She's the one who figured out how to turn your quantum communication network into what she calls a really fancy group chat." The main display showed the ongoing integration of captured Nexian vessels into the human fleet. To Xerox's mounting horror, the humans weren't even attempting to maintain the ships in their original configuration. Each vessel was being modified in ways that made her technical training scream in protest. "But that quantum stabilizer can't possibly work if you mount it at that angle," she protested, pointing at one particularly egregious modification. "Actually, it works better," responded a cheerful voice. A young human engineer popped up from behind a console, their uniform covered in what appeared to be quantum coolant stains. "Turns out if you tilt it 17 degrees and run the power through what you guys were using as a backup coffee maker, you get 30% more efficiency, and it makes the ship's quantum field taste like mint." "Quantum fields don't have tastes," Xerox stated automatically. "They do now." The engineer disappeared back behind their console, humming something about quantum flavor enhancement protocols. Admiral Chen guided Xerox to a surprisingly comfortable seating area. "Look, I know this is all probably giving you the equivalent of a Nexian anxiety attack, but there's a method to our madness. Your civilization achieved incredible things by perfecting specific approaches to problems. But humans, we thrive on finding new problems and solving them in increasingly bizarre ways." The main screen shifted to show a training exercise where former Nexian crew members were working alongside humans. The Nexians were visibly distressed as their human counterparts demonstrated what they called freestyle quantum mechanics. "Is that human pilot using a quantum field modulator as a skateboard?" Xerox asked weakly. "Yep. Lieutenant Rodriguez figured out you can ride the quantum wake if you reconfigure the personal shields just right. We're still not sure how she survives the radiation, but she insists it's fine because she drinks a lot of orange juice." Xerox watched as a Nexian officer tentatively attempted to replicate the maneuver, following Rodriguez's casual instructions rather than the proper military protocols. To everyone's surprise, especially the Nexians, it worked. "That's the thing about chaos," Chen continued. "Once you embrace it, you start seeing possibilities everywhere. Your quantum drives are amazing pieces of technology, but you never thought to use them for interpretive dance." "For what?" The Admiral gestured to another screen, where a human physicist was explaining something to a group of bewildered Nexian engineers. Their presentation appeared to involve interpretive dance movements that somehow corresponded to quantum field fluctuations. Dr. Park discovered that quantum fields respond to rhythm and movement in ways your mathematical models never predicted. Turns out, sometimes you need to literally dance with quantum mechanics to understand its full potential. Alarm suddenly blared, but instead of the crisp, standardized tone Xerox expected, it was that ancient human music called disco. Oh good, the quantum harmonics are aligned enough for the dance theory to work. Chen grinned. Watch this. The main screen showed one of the modified Nexian vessels beginning what could only be described as a choreographed quantum dance. The ship's fields pulsed in rhythm with the music, creating patterns that should have torn the fabric of space-time but instead resulted in the most efficient quantum drive configuration Zorax had ever seen. How are you measuring these effects? She asked, professional curiosity temporarily overcoming her shock. Oh, we're not, Chen replied cheerfully. Traditional measurements would collapse the quantum states. Instead, we got an eye that synesthetically experiences quantum fluctuations as colors in music. It tells us when things feel right. Feel right. Zorax's scales were now shifting through colors that hadn't been seen in Nexian emotional displays for generations. You're navigating quantum mechanics by feel. Sometimes we also use taste. There's a guy in quantum propulsion who can tell the efficiency of a drive by licking the air near the quantum field boundary. We're still not sure if that's actually working or if he's just really lucky, but his success rate is 97%. Zorax watched as more Nexian crew members began cautiously experimenting with human methods. To her surprise, some of them were starting to show signs of actually enjoying the chaos. One particularly bold Nexian engineer was attempting to explain traditional quantum theory through what humans called interpretive shadow puppets. The really interesting part, Chen said, is that by breaking all the rules about how quantum technology should work, we're discovering rules we never knew existed. Your civilization perfected one path. We're finding out there are infinite paths, all leading to different kinds of perfection. As if to demonstrate this point, the upside-down cyber warfare specialist suddenly shouted Eureka and executed what she called a victory roll in her suspended workstation, causing several nearby Nexians to flinch in anticipation of disaster. Instead, the screens around her lit up with new data about quantum communication possibilities that shouldn't have been possible. I figured out how to make quantum particles do a conga line, she announced proudly. We can increase data transmission rates by 500% if we just get the particles to dance. Zorax opened her mouth to explain why that was impossible, then closed it again as the test results scrolled across the screen. I think I need to sit down. Already sitting down, Chen pointed out helpfully. I need to sit down more, Zorax clarified, slumping slightly in her chair. How do you maintain any sort of military discipline with all this chaos? Chen's expression turned serious for a moment. That's the big secret, isn't it? True discipline isn't about following rules perfectly. It's about knowing which rules matter and which ones are just getting in the way of progress. Every human you see here is incredibly good at their job. They just do those jobs in ways that make sense to them. The room's activities continued around them, a symphony of controlled chaos that somehow produced results that bordered on miraculous. Zorax watched as a Nexian quantum physicist tentatively asked the upside-down specialist if he could try her workstation setup. You know, Chen said softly, your people aren't so different from us. You just got stuck thinking there was only one right way to do things. But look, once they see it's okay to experiment, to play, to make mistakes, they're natural chaos embracers too. Zorax nodded slowly, watching as the Nexian physicist spun gleefully in the suspended workstation while describing quantum probability curves through interpretive gesture. Perhaps, she admitted, perfection isn't what we thought it was. Nope, Chen agreed cheerfully. It's way more fun than that. A perfect chaos. 3 months after what humans had begun calling the Great Quantum Dance Party. Much to the Nexian High Council's dismay, Supreme Commander Zorax stood before her people's leadership with Admiral Chen by her side. The council chamber, once a model of geometric perfection, now featured what humans called mood lighting and a suspicious number of disco balls. Esteemed council members, Zorax began, her posture still perfect, but now with a subtle swagger that would have been unthinkable before. I present our final report on the Earth Integration Initiative. The head counselor, their scales shifting in barely contained anxiety, gestured for her to continue. Please tell me you've at least maintained some semblance of proper military protocol. Oh, absolutely, Chen chimed in cheerfully. We've maintained all the protocols that actually work. We just added jazz. The holoscreen activated, showing what appeared to be a Nexian warship performing barrel rolls through quantum space while its quantum drive pulsed in rhythm to something called Stayin' Alive. What you're seeing, Zorax explained, fighting to keep her own amusement in check, is the new quantum resonance enhancement technique. by allowing the quantum drive to synchronize with specific vibration patterns, what humans call getting into the groove. We've achieved a 300% increase in efficiency and a 500% increase in style, added a voice from off-screen, followed by the sound of someone being gently shushed. The council watched in mixed horror and fascination as the presentation continued. Clips showed Nexian crews working alongside humans. Their once rigid formations replaced by what could only be described as organized chaos. Ships moved in patterns that defied traditional military doctrine, but proved devastatingly effective in combat simulations. But what about standardization? One council member protested. How can we maintain quality control if every ship is different? Funny you should ask, Chen said, pulling up another display. We actually found that allowing ships to develop their own personalities leads to better performance. Each crew optimizes their vessel for their specific style and strengths. The result is a fleet that's impossible to predict or counter, because every ship is a unique challenge. The display showed a recent training exercise where a single modified Nexian cruiser, its quantum drive somehow running on what the humans called punk rock energy, had outmaneuvered an entire squadron of traditionally operated vessels. We call that one the quantum mosh pit maneuver, Chen explained proudly. Still working on getting the name approved by the official military terminology board, but they've gotten pretty flexible lately. Xerax stepped forward again. Council members, I know this all seems to violate everything we believe about proper military operation, but the results are undeniable. Our joint fleet's combat effectiveness has increased by 857%. Crew satisfaction is up 923%. And perhaps most importantly, she paused, her scales shifting to a color of profound satisfaction. We're having fun. The council chamber erupted in murmurs. The concept of fun in military operations was nearly heretical, and yet the data scrolling across their screens was impossible to deny. There's something else, Chen added, her tone growing more serious. In learning to embrace a little chaos, your people haven't lost their dedication to excellence. If anything, they found new ways to achieve it. Watch this. The screen showed a joint human-Nexian engineering team working on a new quantum drive design. The Nexians' precise technical knowledge combined with human creativity had produced something entirely new, a drive system that was both perfectly engineered and beautifully unpredictable. We call it organized chaos theory, Xerax explained. The humans taught us that perfection doesn't have to mean rigidity, and we taught them that chaos doesn't have to mean disorder. Together, we're finding a balance that neither of our species could have achieved alone. One of the younger council members leaned forward. And one of the humans' defensive capabilities, surely this unorthodox approach leaves them vulnerable. Chen grinned. Would you like to test that theory? We've got a training exercise scheduled for later. Fair warning though, last week someone figured out how to make quantum fields taste like strawberries while improving their defensive capacity by 200%. We're still not entirely sure how that works, but it does. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Their perfect plan to conquer Earth hadn't just failed, it had evolved into something far more valuable. A partnership that challenged both species to grow beyond their limitations. There is an ancient human saying, Xerax said, addressing the council one final time. Something about the perfect being the enemy of the good. We thought perfection meant never changing, never adapting. The humans showed us that true perfection is the ability to embrace change, to find new ways of excellence. And we learned that sometimes the best way to win a war, Chen added, is to turn it into a dance party. As if on cue, the quantum fields surrounding the council chamber pulsed with a rainbow of impossibly efficient energy patterns, accompanied by the faint but unmistakable sound of disco music. The head counselors sighed deeply, their scales shifting through several previously unknown colors. Supreme Commander Xerax, Admiral Chen, your report is accepted. Though I must ask, is the background music really necessary? Of course not, Chen replied with a wink. That's what makes it perfect. And somewhere in the quantum field surrounding them, particles that had once been bound by rigid laws of physics continued their eternal dance, proving that sometimes the most perfect plan is having no plan at all. The end.